All right, so the recording is kicked off. As I mentioned, so week 3, we've uploaded week 2, the exam topics. There's a lot of subtlety. Practice is really recommended. It's one of those hands-on things that the more you use it, the more you understand it, especially things like record types. I'll let Harrison work with that. Explain how to create, delete, customize fields, page layouts. Again, the more you use it, the more you get comfortable. You get your own methods of placing objects and having a systematic way of tracking those. A lot of people have different preferences. But again, there's lots of options. There's also conditional formatting and things like that, dynamic forms, which came out probably about a year ago, which is something worth looking into, and the scenarios. So I'll just flick through. All of these things will do some traceability back at the end of the meeting to see if anybody's got questions over any of these topics. I've added a couple of trailheads in there so that you get some hands-on time. There are a number of projects, but this is really about how do you create your objects, how do you add your fields to it. There's also, I'd recommend looking at like YouTube. YouTube, you can build an app. There's a couple of little videos where you can build an app in Salesforce in about 7 minutes. Of course, that's for somebody who has experience and knows exactly where they're going. It's that 7 minutes. We'll be running some build an app in a day or app in half a day events down the track. And that 7 minutes is drawn out into step-by-step explanations of what happens when you're building an event, an application. There's something that isn't explicit, but I'm not sure Harrison will go into. If not, I'll show it at the end, which is just how you create an object importing from a spreadsheet. Really makes things a lot quicker. But again, the more practice that you have, the more comfortable you feel. I also wanted to add Apex Hours. So Apex Hours is a really good resource. I'll add a couple more of these in over the weeks. Apex Hours is one of those websites that it's community run. The guys have put a lot of effort into creating a lot of videos. There's a lot of topics. This one here is a really good one for exam prep. So to complement what we are showing you and we're explaining, it gives you an opportunity to hear similar content in a different way, might resonate slightly differently to you. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Harrison.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Just before I get started, I do have a habit of clicking lots of tabs very, very quickly, especially if I'm like in mid-thought. So if I am going a little bit too quickly or clicking around tabs too much, just raise your hand or do a chat to say, you know, settle down, because when I get going, I can become a bit too enthusiastic. So today I wanted to go through, I'm coming at this from a not-for-profit success pack installed org point of view, because a lot of you are from not-for-profits, or most of you are. So I've created a developer org and installed a not-for-profit success pack, but I've only done that. So I kind of want to go through standard objects, custom objects with, standard objects, custom objects that have been installed from packages, and then custom objects that you yourself or your admin have created to store your own custom data. There are actually a bunch of different types of objects, but the most important ones from your point of view are going to be just standard and custom objects. But for you guys to know, there are also big objects, and these are very limited in their functionality, but they're designed for tens of millions of records. So there's big objects for that. And then there's also other kind of pseudo objects like custom metadata and that kind of thing. And those are for custom apps and have their own use cases. But what we're primarily going to be talking about today is going to be your standard objects. And they are designed to have a set kind of functionality, and then your custom objects in the two different flavors that I mentioned before. So I'll just start. I'm sure you guys have seen images like this before. They're everywhere. This is a general object diagram of the not-for-profit success pack, and you can see a lot of the objects that are installed from the not-for-profit success pack and how they are all related with each other. I'll just say this isn't going to be the most exciting topic because we're talking about fundamentals and basics. But that being said, because it is fundamental to the Salesforce system, you do need to have an understanding of how data can be stored, how data is stored, and then how you can access that data. Because when you know that, it impacts literally everything else you do, including, creating a new person to reporting on last year's income. If you understand where your data is stored and how it's related, that you will, it'll make reporting and having data visibility, making data visibility much more simple and easy. And that's what you want from a database. So I'll just start here. Salesforce, this is a standard developer org. So like pretty bare bones, and I've installed a not-for-profit success pack. If I scroll all the way down to the bottom, I can see that there are 115 items in there. So by default, with the not-for-profit success pack, a developer org has 115 objects installed. And you might think, that's so many, why? Well, a lot of the objects are actually just designed to be supportive objects, and you won't actually really come across them. So we'll just start off with our standard objects so we can have an understanding of the more traditional uses of an object. So we'll go to service or sales here. You can see along the top here, we've got accounts, contacts, cases, reports, dashboards. Reports and dashboards aren't objects, they're reports and dashboards. But of these, we can see accounts as an object, contacts is an object, and cases is an object. These are what are known as standard objects. They are pre-built by Salesforce. They have their own behaviors that are unlike a lot of, they're effectively unique, and they've been designed to work in a certain use case. So contacts and accounts are two objects that are heavily related with each other, and I'll go through that later when I talk about object relationships. But just for now, just note that standard objects have been designed by Salesforce to do a thing, and they have their own unique aspects to them that are unique to them. So a good example of that is an object that we can't see here, which is the leads object. Leads objects, the lead object, which is where you get in your, if you did a purchase list, or if you had a list from an event that you happen to know the details of, that's where you'd put your information before then shifting through the contacts to know if you want to continue your engagement with them. Leads, the lead object is designed to be converted into three separate ones when you do move on. So you go from having one lead to having an account, a contact, and an opportunity. Standard objects are very important in the sense of that they are the foundation of your foundation. And leads aren't so often used in not-for-profit kind of contexts. That's more the accounts and contacts. So we'll just go here and we'll start with adding a new field to a standard object. So everyone needs to go to your setup menu up at the top right, setup and object manager. And this is the list of all of the objects in your org. You can see here that it says the type, and you can see the type is the standard object versus the custom object. Note that custom objects are either objects created from an installed package that you've installed. So in this case, you can see that the address object is a custom object, and that came from the not-for-profit success pack when I installed it. Whereas you can see here activity, which is a combination of tasks, events, call logs, and there's another one that I can't remember. That's a standard object. And then we've got account, which is kind of the foundation of the foundation of the foundation. Pretty much everything in Salesforce revolves around accounts and then their relationship to that. So we'll start off with just adding a field. So if we go to the account object, this is our standard object. There's not much we can edit here because standard objects are limited in the kind of customization you can do. We go to the first tab on the left here, down from the top, and that's fields and relationships. And here it lists all of the fields on your object, regardless of whether or not you can see them on the page layout. This is just every single field that exists on that object. And as you can see, there are a lot of fields. If you were to actually look at the record page for an account, so if we go to an account in Salesforce, you can see that there are nowhere near as many fields here as there are in that list. So that's the first thing to note. So if it doesn't show up on the page, that doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't exist. It could just mean it's not on the page layout for that object, for that view, and so on. So we've got three main things. You've got the field label. So that's just what it shows up on the page layout. You've got the field name. That's how it's referenced in kind of programmatic circumstances, or when you're doing bulk data upload, you'll want to be using the field name, not the field label. And then you've got the data type. And there are a number of different data types in Salesforce, all with their own requirements and uniqueness. And often choosing which data type to use, it can actually be counterintuitive often. And I'll go more into that later. And then you have controlling fields. This is generally used with pick lists. So if you have pick list 1, select value A gives you options 1, 2, or 3 in pick list 2. That option B in pick list 1 gives you options 3, 4, 5 in pick list 2. That's one of the controlling field references. And if something is indexed or not. Now, most of the time you don't need to know if something is or isn't indexed, but if you're doing an upsert, it needs to be indexed. Or if you're dealing with over 500,000 records. So again, probably not super common or not something you'll come across right now, but there is a use for it. You can see in the buttons in the top right here, these buttons are different for different objects, by the way. They're not all the same. For example, on the lead object, it actually allows you to choose custom field mappings from when you convert a lead to a contact account and opportunity. So that's actually an important thing. If you're using leads and you're having custom fields on the lead object, you do actually want to make sure that information is then transferred onto the contact or account or opportunity objects. We can see there's the new button here. That's important. That's where you create your new fields. You've got your deleted fields. This is just effectively a 30-day, I changed my mind, recycle bin kind of case here. If you happen to hit your the org limit of the number of fields you can have, and you delete it from here and it's still not letting you add it, check it here because it might still just be sitting there. Field dependencies and then set history tracking. Set history tracking, pretty important if you want to be tracking changes to field values, who did it, when, what was the previous value, and what is the new value. So you can see here, you can actually enable account history. So this then has Salesforce track all the changes that are made on the object. And then you can choose which specific fields on that object gets tracked, when they are changed, what was the previous value, what is the new value. And field history is important on all objects, including custom objects. So let's create a field. Okay, so we're on our account object. We click new, and then you get a whole list of different possible field types that show up. You have auto numbers. These are useful for things like if you wanted to create a mail ID for your donors or something. It's just a sequential number that counts up in the format that you desire, from record number 1 to record number they generate as you create new records, as new accounts or contacts. Formulas, these are very, very useful fields and quite powerful. These fields allow you to produce a value based off a formula, as it suggests. But these are very powerful, and we'll get to them later. And they're especially powerful when used with relationships, because you can then pull information from an object 3 objects away in terms of lookup relationships and put that value onto the account. Rollup summary, they roll up either a count or a number field from child objects to the parent object. And I'll get to that later as well, because that's going into our relationships between objects then. You've got lookup relationships. There we go. There's our lookup relationship. Your external lookup relationship, this is similar, but it's when you're dealing with data stored outside the Salesforce org. So it's not likely something you guys will deal with because it does require additional permissions, but you can have, there's another type of object called external objects, which are effectively data tables. And then you've got a whole variety of different types of field types. So you've got, your standard checkbox, true, false, 1, 0. You've got currency fields, date, time, email, and so on. And all of these fields are very useful in different circumstances. And they all have their different behavior as well. So for example, if you create a text field, you can then search on that text field when you use the Salesforce search at the top. But if it's something like a long text field, the search may or may not pick up on that as reliably. Another good example is pick lists are quite limited in what you can do with automation. So often you'll have to, if you want to have a pick list, you'll then need to store that pick list value into a text field as well at the same time to be able to automate off it and that kind of thing. Phone field is simply a text field that is, requires number formatting, as in mobile number formatting, phone number formatting. And you've got your good old things like text area rich, which is like you can copy and paste out of a Word document into that, and it'll keep all of its table formatting. So that's quite nice and handy. Text encrypted, a bit more niche in terms of its use case. You've got time and URL and so on. So there are lots of possible field types, and they all have their pros and cons. So let's create a pick list, because that's one that people like a lot. People like pick lists. Let's call this the favorite animal pick list. We're going to enter values manually. You can create a global pick list value set, which is effectively just a set of values that you can then use on the same set of values on different fields on different objects. So it's quite useful for consistency. So you don't need to remember, what are all the things. You can just create that one list, and then if you had it on the contact record, the opportunity object, and so on, you could then just select that same set of values. But in this case, because we don't have an animal global value pick list set, I'll just enter them manually here. So I've got cat, dog, bird, and I don't know if that's how you spell iguana, but there you go. Pick lists, you can display values alphabetically, or you can display them in the order that they were entered. That's just a preference choice, display choice. You can use the first value as default value if you want. You can restrict the pick list to values defined in the value set, or you can not do that. And that can be helpful if you're not sure what values are coming in from an integration. So a good example is if you're syncing from a fundraising system and you're not sure all of the possible values that are syncing across from it, you would not restrict the pick list, and then that can help you avoid errors and still have the data sync across correctly. One thing to note though, if you did want to have this list as your global pick list value set, it does need to be a restricted pick list. So any pick lists that use a global value set have to be a restricted pick list. So you can't use a global value set and then add your own ones for that field on that specific object. Description and help text, always important to add, just so you come back a year later and remember what it was. Required, there are a few different ways you can require something in Salesforce. So this is the most powerful way, effectively. So it's in order to save or create a record on this object, there has to be a value here. That is helpful, but it can also be quite limiting. So use that with a grain of salt. There are other ways you can make sure people fill in information when you want it to be filled in that aren't quite so cutthroat. And then default value. So this, in a pick list case, it's not super helpful, but you can do something like based off the month it is of the year, pre-fill a value of whatever you want, something like that. So default values, typically quite helpful for date time fields. So if someone's creating a case or you want to create an event for the current time right now, instead of having someone to have to manually enter it in, you can set the default value to be a now, which would be now, or today in the case of a date. So these formula values return now or today. But in this case, I'm just going to go with cat. Always for text fields, always remember to include your quotation marks.
Harrison, can I ask a question just real quick in case I forget? Can you go back to that screen? I know you said it's good to put in help text and description in case a year later you come back. Does description, I know help text would show up on the main screen, right, when you hover over the little icon. Does description pop up in the real prod system as well?
No, it shows up.
Is that just for the back end?
It shows up, yeah, in the back end. So here.
Okay. Thank you.
So help text is typically, if I'm being lazy, not really lazy, often I'll just put the help text in, because the help text will tell me exactly what the field is and what it's used for anyway, because an end user needs to know what a field is for if it's not self-evident.
It's also really good if there's obviously legacy issues. If someone goes, they've created their own field, and the next person to come along needs to understand what that field was meant to be for. So if you're creating a field, it's a good idea to have a description.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Help text. Oh, yeah, both. So if we then go to our, go next, the next screen is establish your field level security. And this is where you can, at a fairly high level, set which profiles should be able to, one, see the field, and which profiles should be able to only see it, i.e. not edit it. So if I make everything visible, it means every single profile can see and edit this field on the object, assuming they have access to, one, the object, and two, the record, because those are other considerations. But from the field's point of view, these are all the profiles that can see and edit it. If I also tick these, that means every profile can see the field, but only that. They can't edit it. So that's just a quick and easy high-level way of being able to set it for large numbers of profiles. It's easier to do it here than to go through each and every single one of the profiles and tick the field value. It is that is a bit tedious, but it's the kind of thing that Salesforce doesn't allow you to bulkify, because you only really need to do it once, and it's better to have more control rather than less when it comes to security. But in this case, we can do it here quickly. And then we can add the fields to the page layouts. And again, this is pretty important because do you want the fields to sit on the object and store information but not be visible to anyone? Or do you want people to actually be able to see and edit the field on the page layout? So in this case, I will add this field to the page layout. So then I'll just go save. I can go save in new if I wanted to. I'm just going to go save here. And there we've got our new field. Our new field has been created. So speaking of page layouts, that's our next tab. We've then got all of these page layouts. These come default from the not-for-profit success pack and the developer org. But you can make your own ones here. And effectively, a page layout is just what fields, what buttons, what actions, and what related lists show up when you're looking at a record for that object. Now, it is also a little bit more complicated than that because Salesforce, since they brought in the Lightning, created Lightning pages, which also allow you to do additional customization. But for the sake of this, just really know that the page layout on an object deals with what fields you can see and what related objects you can see on that field, and then what actions you can do. So if we can see here, we can see the favorite animal field that we created just then was added to the page layout. Nice and simple there. And you can see the preview for all of the other ones as well. You can also see preview as on a page layout to see if other profiles can actually see a field or not. So if a given profile didn't have access to see a field, you could view it as them and then the field wouldn't show up on that layout. So that can be helpful. Again, as with anything, there are also lots of other more advanced buttons that you can do. I'm not going to go through that now because we'll be here forever, but there you go. There's a lot you can do here. As I mentioned, on Lightning record pages, that's the Salesforce, the new version of Lightning record pages, and that's where you can set more advanced layouts and components onto a page for the given object. And then you've got buttons, links, and actions. Another thing, again, this is a very high-level overview. These allow you to do customized actions that are object-specific. You can create your own button or link. These can become quite complicated as well. But just know that these here exist and you need to add them to the page layout. I won't go through all of these other ones, but a very important one, especially for you guys, will be record types. The not-for-profit success pack has 2 record types for accounts by default, organization and household. Now, record types are, in my opinion, for functional differences between records within an object. So for standard objects, the distinction becomes much more clear, but when you're trying to do something custom and start building your own custom objects, it can kind of be more difficult to know, oh, should this be a different record type or should this be a completely different object? But for the accounts case, the functional differences between a household and an organizational account are quite significant. A household is dealing with a number of people who live together at the same address, and they're going to be expecting to have mail, and they're going to be soft credited for each other's donations, that kind of thing. Whereas an organization really wants to keep track of the more corporate side of this organization has donated, and it's less to do with the people that make up the organization. So there are functional differences, even though both types sit on the same object. And just one last thing I'll go to is validation rules. So validation rules is when I said before that there are multiple ways that you can make a field mandatory, this is another one of those ways. So validation rules are effectively ways to ensure the data integrity of your org, either stopping errant automations from running, stopping data entry issues from users. They are very powerful and they're very useful. I'll just note that there are two different ways you can do validation rules. You can do, there's only one right way to do this, which is quite, if you do it this exact way, it will work. If you do it any other way, it will error. But then you can also do it, there's heaps of right ways, but if you do it specifically these ways, it will be wrong. So when you create your validation rules, try to think, is there only one way someone can save or create this record? Or is there any number of ways someone can save or create this record as long as they don't do X, Y, or Z? So just keep that in mind when you're starting to think about validation rules. And validation rules, for that matter, use the same formula editor as formula fields and a variety of other things. Once you start to learn formulas and that kind of thing, it's all pretty consistent from a config point of view, the formulas you can use and where you can use them. Let's go back to our account object now. And if we look at our account here, we can then see on the details page that if we look somewhere, oh, not on the page layout. There we go. What this is probably because the record type is not a, yeah. So this is an example of when these accounts were already created, and then I installed the not-for-profit success pack, and because I did that, they haven't been given the correct record type. Where is record type? Not here. There we go. There's our favorite animal, cat field, dog, cat, and bird, iguana, and so on. So you can see the field just pops up there. It can be a little bit slow and you need to make sure it's on the right page layout. But yeah, there you go. On that matter, when you do make changes to page layouts, it can take up to 15 minutes to actually sync across, because Salesforce, for performance reasons, caches pages on people's desktop. So if it doesn't immediately appear, don't be too upset. But yeah, definitely, if it's not there within 15 minutes, there's some issue. Okay, so that's our standard object for account. There are a bunch of different standard objects. If we look at the Schema Builder, which is, if we go back to, sorry, the Object Manager at the top right here, we can see the Schema Builder button. This gives you a map view of all the objects in your org and how they're related. It can be a little bit overwhelming. If we select all and then zoom out, you can see, wow, there's lots and lots of objects and they're all related to each other, right? So typically no one looks at them in this way. You actually just look at the ones you want to. So if I want to go account, I want account. Let's see accounts and activities, and then let's look at our contacts, and then any opportunities related to them. There we go. So we can then see, this is a much more neat view. So you can see that accounts can be child parent to accounts. That's what the red line is. And then there are a variety of other lookups. So an account can be related to an opportunity, related to a contact, and then you can see for a contact, that's related to an account. Multiple accounts can be related to opportunity contact roles, and then related to the opportunity. An important object here is what's known as a junction object, and that's this one here, the opportunity contact role. And a junction object is very important for allowing many-to-many relationships. So this contact, let's say the name was Keith, could be related to many opportunities. And that's where the junction object comes in. So if Keith was related to, personal donations, that would show up as opportunities. You would need to have that relationship, and obviously more as well if he was also part of a part of a sponsorship agreement with the company he worked for. If he was a key decision maker there, you'd want to capture that information. For one-to-one, if you have two objects that have a one-to-one relationship, you can also just have a lookup that goes directly from the contact to the opportunity and vice versa. If one record on one object is only ever going to be related to one other record on the other object. But if you're ever going to have more relationships than that, a junction object is what you want to use. So speaking of junction objects, how do we create them? On that matter, how do we even create custom objects? So let's go to that now. So we go back to our object manager. Kel mentioned earlier, you can create objects from spreadsheets. If we go to the button at the top right on the object manager, you can see we've got create custom object and then custom object from spreadsheet. And that's what you would use there. You would click that, you would upload your file that has your fields in the columns and then the field values and so on. And then Salesforce will more or less automatically generate the object for you with you verifying the steps along the way. If you didn't have data, let's say you wanted to create something like a survey object where you store your surveys that you go out to various contacts. And you don't have that information yet because you haven't set the survey out, but you definitely want somewhere to store it. And that's going to be part of a future integration where your survey form automatically posts survey data to this custom object. We'll do that now. So we're going to create a new custom object, click the button. This is going to be our surveys, plural label surveys. Here we go. You can add your description here. For storing survey.
Sorry, can I ask another question?
Yeah.
Why does it say starts with a vowel sound? I noticed that when I was creating these.
That's more used for languages other than English.
Right. Okay. So pretty much just.
So it's when it's merging a sentence talking about the object, it will say an or a, right? If it's a vowel sound, it will be an. If it's not a vowel, it will be a. So a survey versus an account. That's what that does.
Cool.
You have your different record name and label format. So you have two different types of ways you can have names for records. Every single record needs to have a name. You can either have a text name, which would be stored as a survey name. So you would enter like Harrison survey response. That would be a text name. Or you could have an auto-generated number, which in this case is more appropriate because we don't really care about naming the particular record because it's going to be aggregated anyway. So in this case, we can do something like, survey response, and then let's have that many numbers. And let's start from number 341. No, 314. That's better. There we go. The starting number is really just for your preference if you don't want it to start at 1. You know, if it's customer facing or donor facing, you might want to start with a more bigger number. Optional features: allow reports, allow activities. This just does a lot of automatic setup. If you're going to be reporting on it and people are going to be seeing it and it's not just there for automation or some sub support object, pretty much tick all the things. That's the advice there. They all do. They do different things, but if you're going to have end users using it and you don't have a very specific use case, you pretty much do want to tick them. One of the ones you wouldn't necessarily tick is search status. If you don't want people searching for specific records in that object, let's say in this case, like a survey response, you don't want people searching for survey responses. You want them to search for the contact who then is related to the survey response. In that case, in this case, we're not going to allow search because we don't want the results from this object to clutter up our search results effectively. So that's a reason why you wouldn't enable searching for a custom object. Let's add notes and attachments. And yes, we will launch the new custom tab wizard after saving this object. So that effectively just instantly takes you to create a new tab so we can then view all the responses. If you didn't create a tab for your object, you can't actually see any of the records from Salesforce. So it's still there and you can still save data to it, you know, through the API or Flow or something, but individuals wouldn't be able to see it on its own. You could also see it as a related list if you relate it to objects and so on. But in this case, I'm going to create the tab for it and do the hardest job ever, which is picking an appropriate icon. Let's go that one. And then, yeah, again, you've got more descriptions and that kind of thing. You can set the tab visibility for people, so only certain profiles can see the tab or not. In this case, everyone can see it. I'm going to include the tab, add the tab of this custom object to the nav bar of every single app. So what that does is if we go to the service app, which is on this page, and because I've got it ticked on that tab thing, if I then save that, it then shows up in the top here. It will show up there, just appended to the end of that navigation bar. So yeah, there you go. So there we go. We've got our custom objects done. There we go. That's the custom object. Job done. But if we then go to look at the fields, you can see there are only the auto number field and then the owner of a record, because every record needs an owner, last modified and created by. So these are automatically created fields by Salesforce. They're required, they're mandatory, they're for auditing purposes, amongst other things. So let's now create some custom fields for our object. I'll just do that quickly. Let's create a checkbox field of agree T and C. Let's make it visible to everyone. So we've got our agree to terms and conditions. Let's add a pick list of how did we do. We'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So here you could use a pick list field or you could use a number field. It depends on where you're doing your data input validation kind of thing. So typically if you have a website form, you would use a pick list there or some other component that has set number values. In this case, I'm just going to use a pick list because I'm going to be manually creating the records. And then let's go with a rich text field because I like them. I like our rich text field and other comments. Okay, so there we go. That's just some custom fields created, but currently this object isn't related to anything. It just exists independent. So we actually wanted to relate it to people. Well, in terms of when deciding what object should be related to what other object, it's going to be, well, what are you using it for? In this case, do households respond to surveys or do people respond to surveys? And that question isn't quite so obvious because it depends on what kind of surveys are you doing and how do you want to treat your households and contacts. In this case, I'm going to say individuals are going to respond to my survey. So, and this is an important part here. This field called a master detail relationship is what makes an object a child object to another one. So, and that is very important because then that lets you do rollup summaries. It has big consequences for data visibility and sharing. For example, if someone has access to a parent object, it in most cases can see all of the child objects and that kind of thing. But here we're doing master detail and we're going to relate it to our contact object. No, not contract, contact. There we go. There we go. The field name is going to be the contact, the person who responded to the survey. Child relationship name is that. We won't allow reparenting, read, write. Yeah, there we go. So the important thing about a master detail relationship is that it's required for a record to be saved. You can't save a survey now without it being related to a contact. which is also why these fields are all mandatory ticked, because they have to be filled. And yeah, we'll add it to the contact related lists as well. So there we go. We've got our quick and easy survey object. They've agreed to the terms and conditions. They gave you a number value, or in this case, a pick list value of 1 to 5, and they can give you the comments. So, and then we've also then related to the contact record. So now if we go to a contact, and let's go Jane Gray, you can see it now shows up here at the bottom because we related it. And there's also a new button there, so we can click that, and now we can, this is always a fun one. This can happen sometimes if you created the object recently and it's just a bit slow. So here we go, we'll just do it from here. So this is the tab I created, the survey tab. If you didn't create the tab wizard, it wouldn't go anywhere, but because I did create the tab, we can go here. So similar to the other list view, we can just create a new survey record there. Yes, the person agreed, give you a 3, some response. Rich text fields are quite useful. You can even add photos to it, which is quite helpful. And then we need to add our contact. No, I don't want to create a new one. I just want to search for Jane. There we go. And then bam, there we go. We've got our survey responses created. We started from our 314 record number. We've agreed to terms and conditions. How do we do? 3, some response, contact, and there we go. And there's nothing else related. If we go to the contact object now, we can then see the survey response shows up there, that record that we just created. So that's how we create custom objects. That's how you create custom fields, and that's how you relate a custom object to a standard object, but the process is exactly the same for relating a custom object to another custom object. You've got lookup relationships or master detail relationships, and yeah, you can use them for that. So I will do one last thing, and I'll show you a roll-up when we're talking about custom fields, because roll-up summaries are quite useful. So let's go to our contact object now, because that's the thing that our custom surveys object is related to. And let's create a new roll-up field here. So we're going to just go to the contact object, fields and relationships. We're going to create a new field. We're going to create a roll-up summary right there. And here we're going to say average survey. So now this will roll up the average score. So if we go to surveys here, because it just occurred to me that our number field was a pick list, which isn't helpful for a calculation. So we need to create one more additional field, and this will be a formula field. So we'll go back to our survey object, and we need to create a formula field on that to give us a number value, because our how did we do is giving us a text value at the moment. So we need to convert that into a number. So I'm going to create a new field, new formula field. And this is our score value. This is going to be just a number field. There's going to be no decimal places. And we are going to insert our how did we do. So pick lists can't be used in formulas. So you have to convert it to text first. So first we're going to convert the how did we do to text. And then we want to get our number value. And then we're going to get our text, and we're going to convert it to the number value. There we go. Treat blank fields as zeros, sure. So we'll get a low score. So there we go. We've got our pick list. We convert it to a text value, and then we convert that text value into a number value. So that then means this formula field is giving us a number value. Okay, and then we go save and new. And then we need to create a number field. Just one thing to note, the reason I'm doing this is because formula fields can't be used in rollups, but you can use a formula field to fill a number field, which then can be used in rollups. So this is something you just need to get used to when doing rollups and that kind of thing. There we go, that. Actually. Just adding that, that.
No one really needs to know what Harrison's doing at the moment until about 3 or 4 more weeks.
Yep. Just be 1 sec. School value that. There we go, crash course on that. So now I'll just go back here and go next here. And then we want to roll up our, we'll go sum. You want score value. Okay. Apparently you can roll up formula fields now. That's good to know. Anyway, survey score we've got here. We're going to sum all of them. We're going to include all records and then go next, next, and save. So then we've got a formula field on our contact record, a roll-up field on our contact record. And then we can see our survey score comes up here. And if we create more surveys, more survey responses, I should say, that will just be counted up. Okay, let's do another one. And then you can see the survey score is being added up right there. And then to create a survey average, you'd need another roll-up, which would be the count of all of the survey responses, and then another formula field, which would then divide the number of your score by the number of responses, and then there's your average. So there you go. That's how you do roll-ups from a child object to a parent object. There we go. We've got field types. I've done formulas now. Schema Builder is done. Master detail. Lookup relationships are done. I've linked standard and custom objects. Record types and their uses I mentioned. And then I've also gone through junction objects. So are there any questions?
Before we go into the questions, let's just do a bit of a summary. There's some topics with the exam will focus on. One of them being data loss. So if you so in that first trailhead module, the data modeling, it will explain how a record is like a line, a row in a spreadsheet. Then it comes up to what the columns are really fields. And then each of the spreadsheets is an object. So I strongly recommend going through some of those. Harrison's done a great job of putting a lot of content within 1 hour. There is a lot of supporting materials. So if you get stuck on any of those parts, Trailhead is the solution. Feel free to message me outside of this. Formulas and validation rules, he's covered off as well. Schema Builder, he touched on. Master detail and lookup. Master detail, it's data relationships. You'll get used to it. The difference between master detail and a lookup is that a lookup will go and look at a table, take that value, but not keep a relationship. So if you update, if you go and delete you can't delete a master without with a child existing. So if Harrison was gave the example of surveys, if Harrison's completed a survey, you can't delete Harrison's record without deleting the survey, because then the survey doesn't have that link. It gets confused.
Oh, well, there are two options. You can stop it from being deletable, or you can automatically have the child objects be deleted when you delete the parent one. So I believe what will happen in this case, if I delete the parent's contact, if we've got the button there, the survey response, well, there you go, that's the other option. Because the validation rule is, because this contact was related to a case, you can't delete it. I deleted that case. Now, if I delete this, I've got the survey response for Jane here. If I delete this, it should then also delete that survey response. So if I refresh now, there we go. The survey response was deleted. So there are actually two outcomes there. It's either it doesn't let you delete the parent object if there are child objects, or it will delete all the child objects if you delete the parent object. And that's a setting in when I created the lookup relationship. That was a setting I chose.
Yep, so that's one topic, data loss. So the idea is very much of, if you've got, the easiest way of explaining it is that sometimes if you ask for a field to be created on an object which has decimal places, but then you actually say, well, I actually don't want those decimal places, I just want the whole number. That works for some fields and doesn't work for others. If you change from the long number with a whole heap of decimal places, and you say, okay, that field is now only integer, we're going to remove those decimal places, you will lose data. There are some fields that you can change over, but some fields you can't. Harrison gave the example before of trying to do a roll up on a text field. And so if you could change some fields to others, but others just don't match. That's it. I'm not going to go into detail. I'll add some links regarding that. Practice on the formulas and validation rules. What was the other topic? The other thing that I just wanted to quickly mention was the difference between page layouts and record types. Some people get a little bit confused just in the terminology. Page layouts is really just where things sit on the page. So you can move them around, and I think Harrison was just showing an example before. A record type, the way that I think of record types is, if you have an object which is animal, you can either choose a cat or a dog, and you're never going to change a cat to a dog. They're different fields, they're different record types. It's the same object, but they're very different ways of dealing with that object. The problem then goes to, if you want to change that for that record, you want to try and change the record type. It doesn't fit. So have a look at record types. It's something that is super important, especially when it comes to reporting. If you don't understand that as a key term, it will have implications down in further training. So from that, I think we'll open it up to questions and see if anybody's got any points that they want clarified.
I do.
Yeah.
Just quickly, if you were to change the pick list so you got rid of dog altogether, what happens to all the previous people who've picked dog?
I'll show you. So if we go to our count field and go to our animals, Salesforce gives you the option. So if we go to our favorite animal pick list that we created, we can see all the values here. If this wasn't a restricted pick list and different values had been synced across, they would show up in the inactive values area. So someone can't pick them in Salesforce, but they do exist. But let's say we don't like iguanas anymore. We can either just deactivate it, so it just isn't selectable anymore, but the data still sits there. And in which case it would go down to the inactive values. We could edit it to something else, or in what you're asking, we can delete it. And what happens when you delete it? You can either replace all of the existing records with another value, or you can replace it with blank. So
yeah, that was what I wanted to know next was, yeah, what happens if you want to change it? Does it change all the previous records as well that had that selected?
Yeah, so if you just edit it, it will change it for all previous records.
Perfect. That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
And so if you say wanted to replace it with a new field, you'd go and create that first and then do that option.
Well, if you wanted to, that's a bit different. If you wanted to create a new field, you would then need to do a data upload. So this is changing the values within the field.
Sorry, I mean value. Sorry, like if you say if iguanas wanted to become bears instead, you would add bear as a value, and then you would delete iguana and choose the.
So I'll do that now. So you just go new. We're able to add a new value. We've got bears. We'll add it to all of the record types because you can have record type specific values. So we've got bear now. That shows up there. And I can then delete iguanas and then replace it with bear and then save. And then Salesforce does a little thing, and then I'll be sent an email in about 2 minutes saying it was completed. There you go. You can also then do replace here. That's a similar thing, same outcome. And then you can specify chart colors as well if you really want specific colors for specific pick list values. They give you that option there. I've never met anyone who wants to use that option, but it exists. So there you go.
Cool. Thank you.
With standard objects, can we change them?
You're very, very limited in what you can change on a standard object. Some standard objects don't even allow you to add fields. Others don't. Yeah. So, but that's the point. Standard objects have been created by Salesforce to do specific things, and that's the way you use them. And Salesforce gives you the ability to use those standard objects within the bounds that they've set for them. And there are reasons for that. Sometimes they're bad reasons, but those reasons do exist. So it's effectively, if you're designing a process that is consistent with the way Salesforce recommends you do a process, like support cases, you would use the support object, the case object, which is a standard object. That's fine. But if you're trying to store information or create a process that is not standard, as in, and by standard, I mean the way Salesforce expects you to use the object, then create custom objects. Custom objects give you the maximal flexibility, and there's not really a downside to using them as long as you don't hit your org limits, which is 300 custom objects. So that's quite a lot. It depends on your org type, but yeah.
Okay, but can they be renamed even, like, or not? Like if you want to rename them, or
they can be renamed, but not here. So here, see how I can't rename it here, but if I go to our survey custom object, I can edit it here and rename it.
Okay.
So that's an example. So I can rename a custom object from here, but if I want a standard object's name to show up differently, and even for that matter, if I want a standard field, which also exists, a standard field is similar to a standard object. It's just a field that Salesforce has provided, and there's one way of using it, and you can't edit it. You're extremely limited in what you can customize on a standard field in a similar way to a standard object. The way you can have its name display differently is through rename tabs and labels. So let's say I wanted the account object to now no longer be called accounts, but to be called it like entities. Entity. T, I don't know. I will do that. It's probably wrong, but I think I'm not a thing. Anyway, so you can see that I changed the name of the tab to entity, and now it's already automatically renamed a whole bunch, but I can also then rename these fields. Note that renaming a object or field here will not change its name in the back end. So if I were to go to Object Manager, it would still show up as its original name and label, and the field would still show up as their original name and label. It's this effectively what happens is Salesforce loads the object, gets the field name, and then is like, oh, is this overwritten? And then if it is, it then pulls that value. So if I save this now, and then go back to our the front end here and just refresh the page, you can then see accounts has been changed to entities there.
So it's basically the same kind of principle about like when you create a hyperlink, you have that whole massive long address, and then you can rename it so that it's a much more user-friendly, like you can customize what it actually shows up as, but in the back end, it's still got all the information.
Yeah, but I mean, that's why the back end has field names versus field labels anyway. But the only way you can rename a standard object or a standard field is using the rename tabs and labels feature, which is if you go to find it, you go to setup, home, and then rename tabs and labels. So I generally only do rename tabs and labels for standard objects and standard fields, because if people want a custom object or a custom field to be renamed, I would do it in the object manager because it's less confusing for people. The only time you would, there are also cases where you would rename a field's label, but not the name. And that's often a consideration if you've got an integration set up, because the integration uses the field name, not the field label. If you change the field name, that would break the integration because the sync can't find the correct field. So field names and field labels in the backend are ideal to change because that leads to the least amount of confusion. But in order to change the name of a standard field and a standard object, you have to do it through rename tabs and labels.
My second question is related to relationships. Yeah. So can we, like we were talking about, like master detailed relationship and like other, like a lookup relationship, can we convert like from one relationship to another one, like from master detail to lookup, or vice versa?
Yes, you can, but it's not really recommended because there's a lot of limitations to that conversion. And often the limitation is you have to delete every single record that exists on that object before you can change the relationship type. So unless it's absolutely necessary, I would probably just create a new object with the relationships you want and then just merge the, transfer the data across. Because things can get messy when you, one of the it's not really a weakness, it's kind of expected, but if you've got a heavily customized object, standard or custom, and those fields are being used in a whole bunch of automations, they're referenced in a whole bunch of places, and then all of a sudden you want to delete the fields or change the fields, you actually have to go through every single other place in Salesforce where that field is referenced, remove the reference, and then you can do it. And that can be quite painful and tedious. So, you know, if it's one field, sure, that's fine. But if you've got 20 fields that you need to change and they're referenced 150 times, you might want to consider just creating a new custom object and setting it up the way you want to. And that can often result in a more clean, you know, clean use case anyway.
So this means like, sorry, but then this means like if we have a master detail relationships and when we want to do a reparenting, we can't do it? Even like for a single relationship?
You can reparent child objects. And that was an option when I created that survey when I created the survey lookup field on the contact, it gives you the option to say, allow this child object to be reparented, but that, or not, but that's a difference in data. So that are you allowing the data to change versus are you allowing the object structure to change? So you can reparent child. Actually, we'll see if we can edit it here. We go to our contact master detail. Yeah, there we go. We can edit it here. So all I need to do to allow reparenting is then just tick that and save.
Okay.
So if that was unticked, the survey responses to deleted Jane couldn't be reparented. But with this now being ticked, it means that I can then just change who owns them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're running about 15 minutes over time. There's a huge amount of content in this section. Strongly advise that you get hands-on. You start working on the projects, the trailheads. You'll get more experience, and then it will all make sense. We always, test. So if you're not sure whether something works accurately, you're not sure how it works, use the sandbox, use the development environment, just test it out. We have sandboxes and development environments to be able to do that. So any problems at all, just give it a go. So any last questions before we sign off and have dinner? All right, so we'll see you all next week.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Hans.
Thanks, Harrison.
Thank you, Cal. Bye, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Kel.